All right, Miss Noel Goddard, founder and CEO of Qunnect. As we go forward, Noel, you've been part of the Innovari ecosystem for as long as I can remember. I've been with the organization for 3 years, and you have really been a name, somebody who, when we say Noel Goddard, when we say the organizational name Qunnect, like it perks people's ears up in such a great way that they kind of lean in and want to hear more of like what you've been doing. But it always hasn't been easy or in the limelight that you're in right now. You've had a lot of great successes over the last few years. Can you tell us a bit of history on Qunnect?
Sure. Obviously, we've been friends to the Air Force Research Lab community and Innovari for at least 3 years. I think it's probably going back to actually the pandemic. So we grew to know the opportunities that the Air Force Research Lab were extending at the time because there was something called the Quantum Collider event. And the very first one came in 2020 when, basically the world was still shut down via the pandemic when the applications went through. So everything was done remotely. And we were fortunate to receive one of the awards. And that award actually ended up being the very first research that we did for one of our core instruments, which we now have as commercial. But it got us started on something because of the opportunity to work on an instrument we always were interested in doing, but we didn't have the funding to work on yet.
Nice. Qunnect is right now currently at the forefront of quantum networking technology. Can you share more about the company's mission and specific problems that you aim to solve within, for quantum communication space?
Sure. So there's sort of three tiers of quantum technologies. There's quantum computing, there's quantum sensing, and there's quantum networking. And Qunnect is definitely, our core is quantum networking. We started off wanting to solve the problem of, can you create quantum technologies which could operate all at room temperature so that you could start to emulate the same type of communications infrastructure that you have today in the digital world. And the very first technology that we spun out with was from Stony Brook University. It was a quantum memory, which operates at room temperature. And memories allow you to add timing to your networks because you can hold and release all your photons and again deliver them to different places. So we started off as a quantum repeater company because the core of a quantum repeater is this quantum memory. But we sort of changed our focus in the last few years to thinking more broadly about how do you distribute entanglement well over telecom fiber and have the opportunity, if you can build that sort of infrastructure, to do anything at the endpoint. So one thing you could do is secure communications. Another thing you could do is link to quantum sensors. So you could start to array quantum sensor arrays, or you could link to quantum computers. So the problems that we're interested in are, at least for the last few years, have been how do you do something that sounds very simple, but in practice is very hard, and that's distribute entanglement across a fiber network and maintain very high fidelity so that you can do something at the endpoints.
Did you always know that you wanted to do quantum computing? Were you good at math and physics?
No, so I did not know that I wanted to do quantum anything. I am a physicist by training, so I started school as an engineering student at a college called Cooper Union, which is in New York City. And I didn't really like the jobs that I saw my friends getting. So I took a summer internship in a laboratory, which was also in New York. And I realized it was a Department of Energy lab that used to be located in sort of downtown Manhattan. And I realized that I really liked the problem solving that people do in laboratories, and that was more what I was interested in, but I hadn't really met a scientist before. And I had met engineers as a kid, so I didn't exactly know what the job description was. But I was lucky to have a very good undergraduate mentor. And I changed schools over to Polytechnic University, which is now NYU's engineering school, but it used to be an independent college. And had a very good undergraduate research mentor, which I think really changed. I basically would not be a scientist if it weren't for somebody who cared enough to mentor. So I think I didn't know that's what I was going to be in my life. I always liked science and math, and I was good at science and math, but I don't think that I was focused on the fact that I was going to be some type of a physicist. I actually studied chemistry as an undergrad and then
Wow.
pushed over towards chemical physics. And then I did my PhD at an institution called Rockefeller University, which had this very interesting program that if you had taken your qualifiers in physics, that you could then get your biology part of your degree at Rockefeller. It was one of the earlier combined degree programs for doing interdisciplinary work. So my actual PhD studies were in biophysics. And that's where most of my actual research happened in the last, well, at least during my graduate career, and then my postdoc at Harvard. And then I came to Hunter College to be a professor in their physics department and build their biophysics program. But 6 years into it, I was realizing that despite really enjoying working with the students, it was just not going to be a permanent place for me. It was really, I think, as much as I really think it's important to contribute to trying to better public education opportunities and research and other things, they're not always set up to be able to make change in these types of institutions. So I then jumped out and tried my hand at entrepreneurship. Stony Brook University had an incubator that was out in Long Island, a little further east than the university, that had affordable space for being able to build essentially biophysics lab. And so I started my own food safety diagnostics company to try to develop a cheap way to test produce for pathogens that I thought would be a nice value add. It's an agricultural community out in eastern Long Island. So that would be
How
a
long
good
did you
value
do that?
add. So full time, I was doing it for maybe 2 years before the regulatory environment changed. I did not do good due diligence on what customers actually wanted. So I was building something that I thought people wanted rather than knowing what they actually wanted. So there were a couple of really classic mistakes, but I was funded by the state of New York program and some other venture money out in Long Island, which introduced me to the state economic development initiatives. I would go on to join forces with another company that was a therapeutics company and run their drug delivery program. They were developing an interesting way to cure one of these it's a difficult pathogen in hospitals called C. diff. And that was a completely different learning experience, but we combined forces so that I had all this laboratory equipment and I had these ideas and licensed molecules. So we did that for a couple of years and came to the point where it realized that that molecule really wasn't going to go forward, but it was also funded by the state. And that basically gave me the opportunity that when the state decided to set up an innovation technology commercialization fund, they reached out and asked if I would be interested in participating as a junior investor, where I would be doing the deal sourcing and handling transactions and working to basically feed the fund these opportunities. And that's how I met Qunnect. So Qunnect was an investment from the Accelerate New York Seed Fund in 2019. We led their round. I started mentoring their team, and then their team asked me if I wanted to join on as management.
Kind of serendipitous, no?
Absolutely.
How that all came. Upon your travels and your journey, did you find that there was proper representation from the female community to go ahead and, have that guidance or looking out into the sea of scientists and engineers to identify with other individuals that looked like yourself as, trying to tie into this population that is more male driven? I think that, there's studies that do show that about 15% of founders or co-founder positions and in undergraduate programs where they only earn about 19% of engineering degrees and 39% of computer science degrees, there is that significance of an underrepresentation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have to say that when I first started college, it seemed that there were far fewer women in engineering and the sciences, just remembering what the distributions were in my classes. Biology does not have, so the life sciences in general are a much more 50-50 ratio. And since I spent a lot of my graduate time in the sort of blending of physics and bio, I was not really in an environment that was lacking in female colleagues. I will say that physics, all of my physics mentors in all of those years were male because this is just who the professors were at these institutions. Having been a professor at a public college, so I was a professor at Hunter College, CUNY, I watched sort of the process of how the attrition starts to happen when you have a lot of women who are in the earlier courses. And as soon as it starts to get harder and harder, you start to have a little bit of an attrition of the population when they're trying to decide whether this is going to be the job that they want, right? Is it worth the effort? I found that a disproportionately large number of women wanted to work in my laboratory because they were looking for role models. So I think it's always important to understand that this is a great opportunity. And again, I wouldn't be in science today if it weren't somebody who mentored me as an undergraduate. I think the connection between education and career is not always clear in science.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is that you have this huge core curriculum. That's true also in engineering, but engineering feels much more like a feeder to a job because people know what the job is going to be, right? Like these companies hire engineers. But with scientists, the problem is that as you start off, you realize that as you graduate with like a bachelor's degree, the job opportunities are limited to the types of opportunities that support more advanced scientists. And that's true both in industry and in academia. So you're almost de facto signing up for the advanced degree side of your life if you'd like to have more options. But, something that's not talked about a lot, which I think is nice when you have these sort of hybrid degree programs like biophysics, is that you can also opt out and get like a master's in engineering that feeds you right back into something that may feel like it has a little bit more opportunities there. I don't think today, in the better institutions, even though there's still obviously not as many women as men in any of these physics-oriented programs, I don't feel that there's a particular stigma. I never felt that when I was working my way through either. I think that women may or may not enjoy the types of rewards that are there in terms of what the career outcome is. So as a professor, you have the opportunity to mentor a lot. And I think that is something that women do naturally anyway. So I think that there's this definitely predisposition that they do well in those types of careers. Whether they want to be in a situation where competing for tenure and such requires, with a true commitment of pushing forward and a grind for 7 years at a college, to try to push towards what that is. At the exact same time in their life that they're typically having young families is a different problem. And you see it with medical careers as well. You see it with almost anything where the sort of advanced degree program shifts the population of professionals to the same time in their lives where they would be normally having families, and people have to make decisions. So I don't think it's because of sort of hazing or bad treatment or something like that, but I think that people start making decisions which are best for their outcomes.
Yeah. Do you see, or do you have any thoughts on how the startup ecosystem could better support women who are looking to enter the field into quantum so that they don't have to make a decision, right? Could they have both?
Oh, I always think people can have both. It's just you have to just decide that it's going to be not simple road, right? I've always admired my colleagues who managed to have, have everything, right? Have the kids, have the tenure, have everything else. Startup ecosystem. I think that the most common mistake I saw made when I was doing the seed investing for the state is people thinking that because it's like time to do a startup, that they should put all of the risk into being able to raise the money and their own salary at the time, like day one when they start the startup. So I would say that my best advice to young women or young men in this case would be, while you are inventing this technology in your graduate studies or postdoc, et cetera, you're going to definitely need to support yourself before you can support your company. And knowing that that's of interest to you in the future, you need to start planning ahead. And if you do that, then you don't end up in these sort of more desperate situations of like, I need to raise a grant, but the grant takes 6 to 9 months for me to get the grant, and the grant is the only salary that I have. So how am I supposed to do science if I need to work another job in order to make sure that all works, right? So I think that planning is something that's hard for the very first stages of the entrepreneur journey, independent of male-female issues of trying to get into that. There are, specific to women, a number of organizations in quantum that are starting up to try to support women coming into the sciences. Again, for quantum, it would be pretty unusual for someone to only have a bachelor's degree and then decide to do something with a deep science R&D type spin-out. So more often than not, somebody is probably coming out of a graduate or a postgraduate study if they're a founder in quantum. There are interesting programs. Europe has one called WIQD, which is WIQD. And in the US, there's certainly Women in Quantum. There's the Womanium. There's a few of these things around that are specific to trying to give young women opportunities to hear talks and other things by leaders in the field that can inspire them and, again, support them as they start to go on those journeys. So I think those exist. So people just need to Google.
My favorite blend is Sumatra.
My favorite blend is Adirondack Dark.
I love all the flavor coffee.
Colombia was my favorite for a long time, but Brazil Cerrado has taken that over.
I like the apple pie better. Jamaica Me Crazy is my next favorite.
Adirondack blend and the cannoli.
I'm going to shift into innovations for Qunnect. You've got a really great groundwork and framework that you've built up. What are some of the most, can you talk about any of the most exciting technological innovations or breakthroughs that Qunnect has achieved so far?
This is a fun one. So there's actually a lot. Again, we started off as a quantum memory company. To my knowledge, we still are the only commercial quantum memory globally, basically. And what's really neat about the quantum memory is it doesn't require cryogenics or vacuum in order to operate, which means it could sit in a data center, very much like any other type of rack instrument. And the unique part of the technology is that you can actually, so everything we do is basically leveraging this interesting property of atomic physics. So we use rubidium vapor, which rubidium is an alkali.
Okay, thank you for saying. Yes. I'm sure those in the other quantum community will understand that. I appreciate you being able to break that down.
But basically, it's like they're atoms, and the reason that physicists really like them is because they behave very similarly to the sort of model atom that you see when you first start taking science courses. They have, they're like a hydrogen atom in terms of what they have sort of like structurally. And they're used for a lot of different types of things in physics, including atomic clocks, because the neat thing about atoms is that the resonance structure, so if you try to excite them with light, is defined by the atom itself. So they're like very precise sort of levels, which you can reach by choosing light sources which tune to those levels. And so we started off, again, building this quantum memory. The quantum memory basically uses lasers to modulate a tube of these rubidium atoms, which basically looks like an empty cylinder because you can't see them, right? There's a very, very small quantity in there. And what it does, the laser basically modulates the transparency of the medium. So normally, if you've been trying to hit it with the laser, it would look opaque. But if you turn the laser to the right place, you can actually make the medium transparent. And when it's transparent, you can sneak in the photon that you want to store. And then you turn the control field off quickly, and the photon you're trying to store becomes a spin wave. And you can store it for as long as the coherence time allows you to rebuild the information. So if I turn on the control field again, I release the photon. And how similar that photon is from what I put into the system tells you something about how good your memory was. So what's the fidelity of that process? So Qunnect is able to do that without any cryogenics. The memory we sell today does 150 microseconds of storage, which is not like the flash drives you have, that you can take, programs from computer to computer. but it is long enough to be able to stop light and then to release light in a way that you might do if you needed to do a repeating process on networks. And that's exactly why we were interested in doing it at the beginning, because again, it was a sort of core instrument to this quantum repeating concept. But then as time went on, we needed to invent everything around the memory. And that was because of quantum memory, if you don't have all the other things to plug it into, if you want to try to do networking. So the company in 2020 decided to start building this product suite. And the Air Force Research Lab had the Quantum Collider event that I mentioned before. And it supported an instrument that we used to call a quantum support instrument. So we knew that we needed to build some quantum devices that do interesting quantum things, and then we needed to build some support devices which help the quantum devices we build interact better with the networks. And this was one of those. So we basically created something that's a little bit like noise canceling headphones for fiber. You have a box at either end of the fiber, and it's one box talking to the other box, and it's constantly checking the real-time fidelity of the channel and asking, is it within threshold? And if it's not, then it runs this calibration cycle where it then applies a compensation signal at the end that corrects for any real-time problems. And that's exactly like noise canceling headphones. They're sampling the environment around you, and they're creating a sort of interference signal so that you perceive it as not having noise. So we're measuring the real-time noise basically in the fiber, and then we're correcting for it. That's been really important because it's allowed us to automate error correction in real time for fibers, which we don't think about changing in the environment, but they do. The fiber is sitting there with the ground temperature changing, with rush hour happening on top of it, et cetera. All of that can affect quantum information trying to flow through it. So that was a really cool device. We won the best quantum product of the year at the Photonics meeting in January, which was really exciting. And then the last one, which I think is one of our really cool devices that came out in 2023, is our entanglement source. We also use rubidium vapor in that one. And rubidium vapor in this case allows us to hit it with some lasers. And when we do, we end up producing a pair of photons, which are entangled. And those photons are two colors. One of them is perfect for telecom, so it can go directly into the telecom fiber. And the other one is in sort of like deep red area that we would call near IR. And that one's perfect for the quantum memory, but it's perfect for a lot of other rubidium-based devices. And why that's interesting is that people build quantum sensors with rubidium. People build quantum computers with rubidium. So it would be a way to interface a quantum device to the telecom network. And to our knowledge, again, nobody's building anything like what we're doing right now in that sphere either. It can be driven as hard as 80 million pairs per second, has really high fidelity. And it has something very special called a narrow line width, which allows it to interface with all of these other rubidium devices at those wavelengths. So those are sort of three core cool project instruments, but we have a bunch of other ones, but those are all neat. So.
Very, very cool. Does Qunnect do this on their own, or is there collaboration with other enterprises, entities, government personnel that you can talk about, or that can be highlighted towards in collaboration with Qunnect's success?
So believe it or not, Qunnect, with the exception of the quantum memory, which was spun out of the university, originally from Stony Brook, everything else has been invented in-house. So it's been a wild ride. We have wildly talented scientists and engineers. So it's been really fun to watch the creativity process. I think that's the best part about a startup, is the opportunity to build things that have never existed before. And it certainly is something that drives all of our scientists and engineers to do what they do. They were talented before, and now they're like exercising that through their creativity. And in terms of partnerships, I mean, obviously we needed support in order to do these things. So I think this is something that people don't think about as much when they're doing startup companies, but it hits you in the face at the very beginning that if you're going to try to build a device that nobody's seen before, you either have to find a venture capitalist who is aligned with your vision and says, here's a big check, so go off and create, or you need to go out and find other ways to support this sort of de-risking process. Qunnect had 6 instruments that we wanted to build at the beginning. that's a lot of risk for any venture capitalist to take on. So we've benefited a lot from the small business granting programs in the early days. The Department of Energy funded all of the early work on both the memory and the entanglement source product. The AFRL award from the Quantum Collider program funded all of the basic research and product development for the noise canceling headphone thing I was talking about, or
Yeah.
APC. So that money is slow because it's grant money. So it goes through processes. You have a phase one, which is typically small, and then a phase two, which is larger, and you compete for both. But it's a great way to be able to de-risk hard tech without, again, having a venture capitalist there ready to sign the big check for you.
So you talk about, the securing funding and being able to have it from a couple different sources. Has Qunnect, do you find any issues with having market acceptance on such a niche area within quantum?
Oh yeah, but this is true. This is true for everybody, right? So the quantum market for all technologies is pretty nascent. I think the hardest part about this company, hands down, has been that you have to build the tech, which is already hard, and you have to build the market.
Yeah.
And for quantum networking, the first application, which is going to be it's clear to everyone that will be broad spread, will be secure communications. And just like cybersecurity companies, the problem is that nobody wants to pay more for security today until they really feel that they're threatened.
Yeah.
And if, God forbid, something really terrible happens, then they all want to know, why didn't we have this in place already? So there's always a challenge with doing it. I think the problem that quantum in particular has seen, and again, so quantum networking is competing with digital networking. So digital networking right now is allowing us to live stream. Yeah, very good, right? And it allows us to stream movies and that type of thing quite easily as well. That's a huge amount of data going at very high speeds over these lines. But quantum networking is, imagine like what the digital internet was in like 1970. That's what the quantum networks are like right now. It's very first devices, very first protocols, first users. So everything's very early, which means it's slow, but it is extremely secure. And now you are in the sort of marketplace of saying, so who can afford to have something sent slowly, but with ultimate security? And the answer to that for, the first generation of quantum networking tools, and I'm sure it's going to be similar for this generation, are keys. So a lot of what we do, even though you don't see it yourself, but when we talk about e-commerce or when we're signing on to Zoom or doing something like this, very often there's an encryption key that allows the two parties to start their communication. Mm-hmm. And if you want those keys to be secure, then there is some high value, maybe not on our Zoom meeting, but for a financial transaction, right? You would worry a lot about this being very secure. And that's a nice application of quantum networking for that. But there's always a caveat. You're going to have to buy the hardware. And I think the cost of getting into quantum has been high everywhere. Quantum computing versus quantum networking has the luxury that we're very used to cloud models. We're used to sort of dialing in to do computational things, right, across, clusters, that are hosted by AWS, et cetera. So they have the benefit that they can kind of sit in a room with a whole bunch of very highly skilled technical people maintaining those computers. Quantum networking needs to be in data centers, needs to be remotely addressed, remotely monitored. It needs to be something which is a stable enough technology that it can be used literally from the software layer without somebody getting their hands in there all the time to tweak stuff. So it has, I think, a larger engineering challenge in front of it than the quantum computing side for scaling across distances and other things. Where quantum computing has the challenges is scaling internally because they're all trying to do more qubits and error tolerance and things like that for basic features for computing. And that limits their market. So oftentimes quantum computing will say, we can solve all of these very hard problems that take forever on a normal computer as soon as we have enough qubits to do it. But getting enough qubits and having error correction and other things in order to actually do those problems is the same challenge all quantum computing is facing right now. They're literally they need to move from being able to do a toy problem to a real problem, and that requires a lot of good qubits. So different systems have different flaws. In our case, the challenge is that if we want these things to be scalable, we need to get them to the point that it's truly software interface, very robust device that can sit someplace similar to a normal networking system.
Okay.
And support information exchange. And we're excited because we're close. I honestly always thought that quantum communications and quantum networking was going to see sort of like real impact before quantum computing because it can get out there. But it's hard to invent the device the first time around because you're overcoming science and engineering challenges. Now it's more like an engineering and refinement challenge, right? Ruggedization. So we'll get there. But anyway, it's been a fun journey, but it's not done yet.
No, and you made a comment of, quantum right now is almost in an era of like 1970 when model computers were coming out. So where do you see Qunnect and the future of quantum being? I hate to say 5 years because could that be a big impact in 5 years? Are we thinking, 15, 20 years is when we'll start to see it more into a commercialized use? What's your long-term visions for Qunnect and the impact that the work you're doing is going to have in the field of quantum?
Well, we were all very excited to see a shift in the past year. There was a lot of talk about people building testbeds. So testbeds are effectively networks hosted by government labs, academic institutions, industry labs. And there had been a lot of talk about how it was going to happen, but we weren't seeing them actually come online. Within the last year, we've seen many testbeds come online. Europe has a huge initiative to put quantum networks in each member state. The US has a large initiative through the DOE. AFRL has an initiative right through the DoD. We have seen private companies in the US and in Europe also staging up testbeds, some of which are our collaborators. All of that feels so much more real than 2 years prior when it was still something that people were planning but not executing on. I think that the natural next steps in quantum networking are so what Qunnect builds today is a rack of all of the instruments I was talking about before, plus some others, that is intended to replicate the protocol that we run today on our New York network. So we built our own testbed. And so what it does is it basically allows you to generate, distribute, preserve, and validate entanglement over any fiber. So this is perfect for testbeds because I just need to buy some racks and have some fiber in between. And but it doesn't run a protocol yet. So we're basically giving people the tools to start doing protocol building. And we think that that's going to be an enabler. So when you ask 5 years, I actually think 5 years is very reasonable. I think within the next few years, you're going to see quite a bit of sort of real protocols coming out of the quantum networking community. And then that will push its way towards standards. And then the standards, of course, will then cause the engineering to get cheaper and more people will be jumping in trying to make the engineering side of things better. So I think that's that's kind of natural thing when you're rolling out a new technology. First, people have to see the utility, and they build protocols that basically enable end user applications. And when that is something that people want, then the engineering and cost of production, everything else of things come down. So yeah, I think 5 years is actually really reasonable. I think within the next few years, you're going to see quite a bit of quantum communications, sort of like landmark studies. We see them already on a lot of the testbeds that are hosted at universities and the academic literature. So you'll start to see it from industry and government too.
That's pretty exciting considering, was it a few years ago you were up here in Rome, New York at the Innovari Advancement Center with the Information Directorate branch of AFRL doing some fiber testing as well.
Yes. We tested the same instrument that AFRL supported there, which was really fun.
Yeah, exciting stuff. I can't wait to see what other things Qunnect does to impact the world of quantum. One piece of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals looking to enter the quantum technology field, what would it be?
One piece of advice. I think that, again, quantum is a little bit more because the market pool is not totally established yet. It's a little harder to get your first few steps. So one of the things that I would advise is that it's really good to look for these programs that exist now to support quantum entrepreneurs. Of course, AFRL run and Innovari and Griffiths runs the Hustle program in upstate New York. There's also a photonics incubator in Rochester that supports photonics companies as well. But then Chicago has a quantum accelerator, University of Maryland. At Stage 1, I'm not sure if it still exists, but it was there at some point. But then there's also some new ones that are coming up in the Colorado ecosystem because there's been a lot of economic development money there to try to get quantum going. And then Canada has one in like the Toronto area. So I think it's a very good idea to be around a ecosystem that can kind of tell you what's expected if you would like to be able to survive as an entrepreneur, right, for the time it takes in order to roll out a product. The challenge with quantum, very much like the challenge with therapeutics and biotech or whatever, is that you're trying to build an expensive thing, and unless you're software, right? So if you're trying to be a hardware company, you need to know how you're going to bring money into the company in order to develop that hardware, and that might be a long path. So being able to plan that well and understand how others have done it, I think is really high value. I also think it's useful to think about how your technology is going to flourish. So in quantum computing, you have Honeywell, Google, AWS. These are all very big names, right? Are you going to end up selling into those companies? Or are you going to have something totally independent and build your own sort of empire? Those are two very different models for how you build a company in the early days. And I think incubator programs are really great at being able to help you think through it, particularly if you're a scientist trying to become a business. Oh, the last piece of advice, don't underestimate how much you need the business side. I think scientists have a tendency to always do that. They're like, oh, business is so easy. We'll just tack it on at the end, but it actually is really, really important to figuring out how you're going to plant the company over the years.
Yeah, it seems like you have a really great group of individuals at Qunnect that have a good, diverse aspect of business and the scientist and engineer portion. I think that's a lot to your success and your leadership on that. I'm always delighted when I pull up LinkedIn and I see your entire team across the entire globe, right? Spreading the world of quantum in your works. And I think it really takes an entire team led by a powerful force as yourself. So a lot of congratulations to you. You should be proud of that.
Thank you.
If folks are watching, how can they connect with Qunnect for partnerships, collaborations, just to kind of have a moment of your time? What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Noel?
So we do have media at QCon. So Qunnect, strangely enough, does not have Qunnect as a domain because in the very earliest days of the company, it had already been taken over by like a sort of troll website world. So our domain name is quconn.com. So there's a media at, there's a contact at. Those are the two places that we tend to take the more general inquiries. Visit our website. So our website is qunnect.inc, INC, and you can see what type of product offerings that we have. We have them all. Well, we're very excited that we have pictures of all of them now on the website. So that's a chance to learn about what we do and what we're trying to achieve. And in terms of conferences and other things, I think if you are truly interested in what quantum is doing in the world today, go to some conferences. So if you're a student, see if you can't attend some of the conferences, which are either in the quantum business space or in the quantum academic space. Many of the people who are actually at companies in quantum go to both. So it's an opportunity to be able to see talks by both the company side and the academic side.
Great. Any other lasting words that you'd like to go ahead and say at all, Noel?
Well, I wanted to thank the Griffiths Institute and Innovari because I think the earliest days of us trying to figure out how we were going to survive as a company, we knew that the relationship with AFRL was going to be important, but all of my core scientists were international, and that really is still true today. Innovari offers a great opportunity for international scientists to be able to participate and work alongside some of the same researchers that are at AFRL, doing great work, but because of just the restrictions on nationals to be inside of AFRL, it really is an amazing resource to be able to allow for collaboration. And I think the way that we've always wanted to pick an important thing in the US, because collaboration is what yields innovation, right? So I think it's a great opportunity for people who don't know what Innovari is. They should check it out and see the opportunities which are available.
Appreciate that little plug. That's a big one. And Innovari means into the new. So very grateful to be into the new and have you as a partner and being able to watch your success and be part of that story for you, Noel.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation to join today.
Pleasure. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thank you to our sponsors at Utica Coffee Roasting Company, always keeping us caffeinated for these coffee and concepts and our Griffiths Grounds podcast. Until next time.
Every day, we put into practice the belief that our community can be revitalized through responsible business development by giving back through innovation, standing out in the industry with new products, methods, and services. Most importantly, to roast and share our phenomenal coffee in that process.